He's here. I saw him.
Ron? Supervisor Frederick? Everyone join me for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please. Supervisor Boyd Frederick has called in. Citizen comments. Citizen comments. Anybody wishing to speak?
She's not ready. She's got to finish that up. Okay. Take a minute. You need to confirm, Ed. Confirm me. No, stop. Oh, tell her to stop for a second.
Oh, could you hold on 1 minute, please?
Supervisor Grady and Rose.
Could Supervisor Grady, could you punch in, please, and then Supervisor Rose? Roll call, please. Thank you. Now we'll go on to citizen comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good evening, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss a very worthwhile endeavor, namely saving the Kemper Pier. There is nothing more satisfying than to be able to look forward to going to the pier and try your luck at catching a fish. Plenty of fish have been caught from this pier, and pictures are available to show many salmon, trout, perch that were caught by the seniors, youngsters, and handicapped individuals. If fishing is not your hobby, many residents have been just sitting on the benches and letting the sound of the waves wash away the stress of the day, reading a book, strolling with young children, and taking pictures, especially wedding pictures. Last year, many county and park members, Kemper Center officials, aldermen, Kenosha Tourism, as well as Kenosha Special Services for the Handicapped Individuals, were solicited to support to keep open the pier. As expected, everybody wanted to keep it open, but no one acted on the issue. Therefore, what was decided was the pier would be raised. I have to admit, I too sat on the sidelines because I never thought raising the pier would ever be an option. In looking through newspaper clippings at the library, I found an article on July 7th, 2004, and Supervisor Terry Rose was quoted in saying that Kemper Center fulfills a need not fulfilled from any other park in this system. 10 years later, that is still true. There are no other piers in Kenosha where the handicapped accessible. People who are in scooters or have someone in wheelchair found it easy to park close to the pier, get their scooter wheelchair out, and easily get to the pier. Last Sunday, I spoke with a man who walked using a cane. He was able just to walk up on the grass to the rocks. He and his wife were surprised that the pier was scheduled to be raised. He stated that there's nowhere he can go to fish. I took a really good look at the construction of the pier. The base is made up of steel I-beams, of which it looks like at least 3/4 of them were pounded into the ground. The pier was built to stand the test of time, similar to the Kemper building. When I was looking at the pier, I turned around and took a really good look at the buildings. The restoration job the county had done on the buildings turned them back into the jewels they were. Can you imagine if raising actually happened, which I found in the newspapers that was a consideration? Yesterday I spoke with the Kenosha Achievement Center, and they were very interested that the pier was going to be raised, but I just spoke to them yesterday, so I didn't give them time to really do anything about it. Yes, I agree the pier needs to be repaired and made safe. Last year, an article came out saying that 60 years ago, estimates for the repairs were around $300 to $350 to repair, or $350 to demolish. At the end of the day, if I'm spending $350,000, I would like something to show for it. Again, Supervisor Terry Rose was quoted in that article, and it said, "It's a value, but does the general public value it? If the general public wants to spend $250 plus to repair it, let's do it." From the people I talked to who use the Kemper grounds, we do want it. Please let me know if I need to start gathering signatures to show the public wants the pier restored. Most people think that it's closed for repairs. I am standing before you asking you to let me have the opportunity to get new quotes or do whatever work is required to save the pier. I just need some guidance in what to do. With today's economy, I think the estimate for repair received 6 years ago is a little too high. My neighbor had contacted Milwaukee Railing Company, who gave a rough estimate to replace the railings, and they were thinking it was going to be like around $20,000 to $40,000 instead of the $110,000 quoted 6 years ago. Yes, this is a very rough estimate because companies won't come out to quote until they know the county is very serious to get quotes. In July of 1985, Kenosha Construction did repair the pier, so maybe Mr. Kenosha can provide what his thoughts are about the cost. And I don't know if the benches have been saved that were there, so I didn't know if that would be needed to be included in the cost. Also, it is rumored that Kemper is considering expanding the parking lot for additional parking. There are green metal fence posts all throughout the soccer field. There were several coaches, both soccer and football, who brought their teams to practice on the field along with adult teams who played on the weekends. There was also schools that take their children to field trips to Kemper to enjoy the outdoors. It's always great seeing
You got
children.
10 seconds, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Well, if there's something I can do to help and get things started and get quotes to see what other options there are available to, instead of raising the pier, just let me know, because I'll do it.
Could you give us your name and address for the record, please?
I did. Oh, I'm sorry. Cheryl Milholland, 6514 3rd Avenue.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else wishing to speak? Anybody else wishing to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak? Citizen comments is closed. Announcements of the chairman. All I have for you tonight is to make sure that you look over your emails that you do get from the county and elsewhere, just to make sure you're up to date on all the information that's being given out to you as far as meeting date changes and other items that are going on. Supervisor reports. Supervisor Alverman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing to report on the committee activities. Supervisor Grady did that at the past meeting from our previous meeting. But I believe after the citizens' comment, I just heard that, so there are no surprises that I needed to report on that this evening. The Kemper piers are in the process of being removed as we speak. Cutting has been done, and crane is coming in the next couple of days. By the end of next week, that it's all gone.
Okay.
So it's something we've reported on for almost 2 years. So this is no surprise, and it's been on the schedule, and it hasn't been a secret, but it's definitely gone by the end of next week.
Thank you, Supervisor Alverman.
Thank you.
Supervisor O'Day.
Thank you, Chairman. The Human Services Board met last week, and 2 reports we put on your desk. One, the Juvenile Justice Report, we thought was very, very informative. We thought everybody in the county board should have a copy of it. And the other one is a collaboration between the county and the KABA, showing the jobs growth in mostly east of the eye on this map. They are also working on a map covering the western part of the county too. That's going to do basically the same thing. And I'm not sure if that one is done yet, but it'll be on the website too. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor O'Day. Supervisor Noble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Planning, Development, and Extension Education Committee met, and a couple things that we do in the committee that won't be coming before the board are called conditional use permits. And a piece of property owned by Keith and Monica Plucker, they were requesting an amendment to the conditional use permit to allow an expansion of the building for the plumbing contractor business that they have in its property. It's in a wholesale trade and warehouse district. The property is located on the north side of County Highway N, approximately 200 feet east of the 308th Avenue in the town of Brighton. We listed a number of conditional uses, some of them to, create a barrier between their property and some of their neighbors. The town of Brighton recommended approval of the request. Another particular conditional use permit was, it's called D&T Properties. This conditional use permit would allow for a veterinarian service in the B2 Community Business District. This property is located on State Highway 50, approximately 2200 west of 261st Avenue in the town of Salem. This one actually was problematic in the committee. We had several neighbors against it, and we asked the Planning and Development Committee to facilitate a meeting with the neighbors to see if they could iron out their differences. The staff did do that, and everybody was happy, and no one then showed up for the subsequent meeting to complain. In fact, some of the supervisors on the committee got phone calls and emails from the neighbors saying they were very happy with the committee, that we sent it back and gave them an opportunity to get a few adjustments made. So, having said that, the town of Salem recommended approval of that request as well. The only other thing I want to report on is our Corporation Council has been working on a mobile tower siting ordinance because of a relatively new state law. And basically, our staff is going to be going to the towns looking for approval of each of the towns. So I want to advise you of that. The proposed ordinance change is replacing the existing ordinance requirements for mobile tower siting to be compliant with that which was approved by a 2013 biennial budget, Act 20. The new law states specifically that a political subdivision may require mobile tower sightings under a zoning ordinance, but places strict limits on how it may do so. And it specifies procedures and standards and so on. So as I said, our Corporation Council has drawn up something that they feel meets state law. And one of the significant things in the new ordinance is that it specifies that a political subdivision may not prohibit the placement of cell towers in any particular location within the political subdivision, meaning essentially that it may not designate cell phone towers as a prohibited use in any zone. So, I really want to let you know that our staff will be approaching the towns, and once all the towns have approved it, we'll be bringing it before the county board for the county to approve. So that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Noble. Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback a tad on what Supervisor O'Day said, who stole a bit of my thunder. The Juvenile Justice Report of 2013 is on your desk. As usual, and I believe the judge is here and she might correct me on this, but as usual, we are still short sites for youth to do their restitution work. So if you know of places that it would be wise to deploy youth so that they can carry through with their duty in terms of paying their debt to this community, that would be fantastic. Additionally, the map that you have on your desk is a small piece of a larger work that's been undertaken by our Job Center manager, Mr. Doug Bartz, which has been an attempt not only to map the job gains and losses in Kenosha, but also to map the where new growth is happening, where new companies are locating. There's a third piece to that that I think is a little more important that's not on our desks, and I don't believe it was emailed to the county board. That document actually details between the three-county region, the workforce development area, Racine, Kenosha, and Walworth, whom exactly is expected to benefit from the placement of the companies that come here. In other words, if they have 50 job openings of, say, electrical engineers, what becomes the split between those three counties? and certainly then what do those wage classifications look like for those jobs. That's been something that he's been working on for a while. He sent that information out, I believe, to the Human Services Committee. Again, I don't know that the full county board has it. It was part of a presentation that was given by Ms. Wandy Mazio, who is our regional economic development specialist from the State Department of Workforce Development. She spoke to the Tri-County Workforce Development Board, I believe, early last week, which is one of the reasons why Mr. Bartz has not given a full report on this to the Human Services Committee, which I very much look forward to him doing. And as I have stated before, when he does do that, you all will be made abreast of that so that you can attend to be part of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Hallman. Seeing no other lights, we'll move on.
Supervisor Noble.
Supervisor Noble.
I didn't see it in our packet, and if you didn't get a chance to read, if you didn't get your email or don't get email, Teddy Wynette sent out an email regarding the Youth and Governance Bus Tour, which is going to be on Wednesday, June 25th, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. All county supervisors are invited to attend, and she especially suggests that newly elected supervisors may want to attend. She needs to know by Friday, June 20th. Things that will be on the tour is the Kenosha County Building Center, Brookside. You'll have lunch at Brookside. Then you'll come to the County Administration Building here, do a tour here, and then you'll go to the courthouse, Clerk of Courts, judges, district attorney, over to the Public Safety Building for joint services, 911, ending with the sheriff, and then back to Kenosha County Center. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other lights, we'll move on.
County Executive Appointments, Michael Pitts to serve on the Kenosha County Housing Authority Board.
Refer to Finance and Administration Committee.
Cynthia Johnson to serve on the Kenosha County Local Emergency Planning Committee.
Refer to Judiciary and Law Committee.
Ordinances, 1 from Executive Committee regarding amendment of MCKC 2.05 RE County Board Standing Committee, amended by committee. Kubicki, yes. Brunig, yes. Rose, yes. Hallman, yes. Esposito excused. Noble, yes. Elverman, yes.
Supervisor Bruning. So it's been moved by Supervisor Bruning, seconded by Supervisor Elverman. Supervisor Bruning, sorry.
Done?
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As everyone has had a chance to read, we are not eliminating the executive committee, but we are bringing back the legislative committee. This is due to, we believe that certain items should be handled by the legislative and would be better served under legislative. The executive committee will remain as a standing committee, but will meet as needed for strategic planning. Just some things that came up in committee. Back in 2012, when the executive committee was formed, there was an amendment to the resolution that stated that 6 months after the formation of that committee, we needed to have a survey done, and the results of that survey were tallied and presented to all the supervisors at that time. According to the survey, it showed that 36% were neutral on the executive committee being created, and 25% said that it wasn't working at all. The interesting part about this survey was that it was the supervisors that had 10 years of experience or more that were more neutral on this committee being formed. When you look at the committee structure that happened a couple years ago, they had very specific structures that they wanted to do and specific agenda items, and I don't believe that those are necessary today. So I think with that, it's best that we bring back the legislative committee, and I hope that everyone will support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no lights, this requires 2/3 vote. Okay. Supervisor Noble.
As long as we're working on this, on the bottom of page 3, there's some language cleanup that can be taken care of tonight. By the way, I'm in favor of what we discussed in committee. However, there's a sentence at the bottom of page 3, and during the remainder of the 2010-2012 supervisory term, all committees shall have no fewer than 7 members. Obviously, that language is no longer needed, so I would also move that we strike that language, that sentence.
Three.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes unanimously. Anything else, Supervisor Noble? Supervisor Hallman? You have nothing? Okay. Supervisor Sklitsky?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question for Madam Vice Chairman. When was that survey conducted?
In 2012.
2012.
It was 6 months after the formation of the committee.
And although we're contemplating, maybe it's not considered significant to some, but it is considered significant to me, a change here. Why wasn't the current board surveyed if we're making a change with regards to this? It's impacting us.
I understand that, but I believe that the role of the executive committee has changed dramatically since the formation of that committee. When it was first formed, at the time Chairman Clark, he brought forward, he wanted to review all the ordinances for Kenosha County and a lot of the resolutions. So that was the majority of what the executive committee was in charge of doing. Those have now been done, and a lot of the issues that are coming forward would be best suited under a legislative committee.
So,
State your point.
I think that what the correct answer to that would be was that after the switch had been made, they wanted to see the results of how that switch impacted people. For us to take a vote on or give our input now, we don't know how the change would turn out. So that's why they did it 6 months later. If we wanted to follow that, we would come back in 6 months and conduct a survey of how we feel the committee change will have went. So I think that's more the reasoning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Gantz.
and obviously this change now impacts this newly elected board, and perhaps that's a more prudent approach to this, is that we do a survey 6 months from now to see whether or not we feel that the committee is. Now, I have a quick question, and it could be either Madam Vice Chair or Mr. Chairman. All of the ordinances of Kenosha have been reviewed and updated. That's what you said, correct?
The ones that needed to be reviewed through executive committee, yes.
Okay. And we're comfortable with where they're at?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Sklitsky. Anybody else?
Supervisor Hallman had his on there.
You asked before, excuse me. Supervisor Hallman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to speak, just simply give a little clarification on the issue of the review period. That was one of the things as part of that change that I really felt quite strongly about. At that time, we had some contentious items in our larger political environment. And so sometimes some of the moves that we make as a body can seem a bit not necessarily as open or as forward as we would like. So I thought it wise that in the interest of transparency that we at least go back and look at things quite carefully. One of the changes at that time was to combine administration and finance, which alone, individually, were both seen as extraordinarily powerful committees, and there were some that thought it was unwise to pull the two together. So I thought it might be good that we should have a discussion about that after 6 months. One of the reasons that was given for making some of those changes was that it would increase efficiency without really detailing how. I thought it would be good after 6 months for us to actually sit down and have a conversation about that. So aside from the UW extension study that was done, when we did have that review, nobody said anything in this room except for me. In fact, it was all but forgotten about until I pushed for it from this chair. So today is a different world. It's a different environment with a different chairman. I don't think a review period will be necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Decker.
I was on the county board, and when we passed this, and it wasn't Supervisor Clark or Chairman Clark, it was Chairman Molinaro, because I've never had Chairman Clark above me as a chairman. He was always a supervisor. I have a question about F. Let me see if I can find, I'm scrolling. 2F. It says, the executive committee, all matters relating to, and this is the change, strategic planning for the greater good of Kenosha County and other matters as deemed necessary and proper by the county board chair shall be referred to the executive committee. What exactly does for the greater good of Kenosha County and other matters as deemed necessary and proper by the county board chair mean?
Well, if any other ordinance or something like that would come up and I feel that it'd be necessary to overview it, I would look at that. I'd look at the way things are moving for the county as well. I'd look at that. Those are some of the things that I would consider in that position of executive committee.
So you wouldn't refer it to another committee? You
Well,
might keep it under executive?
It just depends upon whether it would be going to legislative or it would be deemed necessary to go to the executive. It's not getting rid of executive. Executive's still there. I'm adding legislative is what we're doing.
Right, I understand
okay.
that. I see that
Is
in the
there
ordinance.
something there that you don't like the way it's worded or what?
I'm just questioning what you would keep in the executive committee as opposed to referring it to the legislative committee.
I'd like a lot more of it to go to legislative committee
Okay.
versus the executive committee.
All right, thank you.
Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that struck me was, I looked at the executive committee as kind of an oversight committee, if you would. One that does make rules, but is also headed up by all the chairs of the committees. And now we're stripping that out and putting it into more or less a subcommittee. And whether or not, it doesn't really matter whether or not it is. It's my perspective that it seems as though it's a consolidation of power and rulemaking and procedurals and things along those lines that don't have the oversight that you do get when you have chairmen all sitting around a table and looking at it. Geez, does that rule affect my area of responsibility as opposed to appointed members? And I do realize the chairman has the ability to appoint all members, but it doesn't have that general oversight on the rulemaking portion of it. And I think that that's why it was originally set up that way, and that's why I certainly have some concerns over it. And at this time, I won't support this change. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Rose.
I view the executive committee as whatever the chairman of the board wants it to be. Whatever the chair's vision for the board might be is something that the executive committee might consider. It has a broad goal. It isn't a specific area, as each one of the other committees are very, very specific. This is a committee which takes a look at the overall direction of the county, the committees, and is largely up to the chair to decide and define what direction the county board is going to go. The amendment here, I think, more properly takes the issue of legislation, resolutions affecting the state of Wisconsin, which might affect a county, and puts them back in a legislative committee with a very specific function. So it's, I think, a much broader view of what an executive committee ought to be.
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not to belabor the point, but I'm in favor of this as it currently stands. The move to do away with the legislative committee, as I understood it in the past, was because at the time, the chair felt that the folks on that committee were not necessarily doing their job, and so they thought it might be wiser to have a meeting of the committee chairs to sort of step in that gap and fill that role. I think the idea for there to be an executive committee for the purposes of strategic planning, and with some of the language there that is a bit vague, but that's okay. Sometimes the way that we walk is not always clear, is okay. It's acceptable. And for there to be a legislative committee that can delve into things like the federal budget process, the state budget process, keep abreast of the legislation on both of those levels, as well as what's coming from Wisconsin Counties Association and from NACO, and the issues that constituents might raise, is wise. There can be a lot of heavy lifting there. I can easily think of 10 or 12 issues that would automatically be things that the legislative committee would want to pay attention to, that there's really no need for the executive committee to spend time on. If anything, the executive committee has been committee chairs updating each other about what's been going on in their committee, which if you fall asleep sitting in this room, probably is extraordinarily helpful. If you stay awake, it's a bit redundant. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Hallman. Supervisor Gens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what Supervisor Skalitsky and Supervisor Decker are questioning, and I do. I have been one who has supported leaving the executive committee in place. As being one of the 3 chairmen who have used an executive committee, you know, I did, as Supervisor Rose said, mold it to what I wanted it to be. So I was against, and I spoke out against removing that committee because I think it is part of the way we should do business. But I am okay with the compromise here. I didn't like a legislative thing being tied to judiciary and law with the elimination of the executive committee. So I am going to support this, and I do think that it is a good compromise. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gens. Seeing no more lights, roll call has been called. Vote yes if you're in favor, no if you're against, please. It passes. I didn't get that number. Do you get that number? 18-4. County Clerk.
Ordinance 4 from the Planning, Development, and Extension Education Committee regarding proposed comprehensive plan amendment. Anna M. Burke, trustee of the Anna M. Burke Revocable Trust owner. James P. Howe, Godfrey, Leipzig, Blackburn, and Howarth, SC agent, requested an amendment to the adopted land use plan map for Kenosha County 2035, map 65 of the comprehensive plan, from medium density residential and primary environmental corridor to suburban density residential located in the town of Randall. Noble, yes. Decker, yes. Skalitsky, yes. Retzloff, yes. Gable, yes.
Supervisor Noble.
I move ordinance number 4.
It's been moved by Supervisor Noble, seconded by Supervisor Decker. Supervisor Noble.
This resolution, or this ordinance, is in conjunction with Resolution 8, and there's also another ordinance to follow, number 5, later on in the agenda. This property is located in the southwest corner of the intersection of 406th Avenue and 87th Street. The comprehensive plan amendment will allow a revision of map 65 of the comprehensive plan from medium-density residential and primary environmental corridor, suburban density residential, on tax parcel 64-119-182-0490 in the town of Randall. The town of Randall recommended approval of the request. If you recall, this item was referred back to the Planning, Development, and Extension and Education Committee at the May 20th, 2014 County Board meeting, and the committee reheard this item at their meeting on June 11th and recommended approval of the request. On your desk, you should find a letter from the attorney that represents the M. Burke Revocable Trust, And basically, in the letter, it says, a question was raised as to whether county approval of these applications would fully resolve all issues raised in a notice of injury and notice of claim served on Kenosha County, July 15th, 2013. Then it further says that the issues raised in the notice of claim and notice of injury would be resolved if the 3 pending applications are fully approved. The Burke Trust would have no further plans to commence litigation based upon the dispute outlined in the notice of claim and notice of injury. It says you will provide this letter to the Kenosha County Commission or Committee in advance of contemplated special meeting to be held early next month. So as I said, we did meet. We have letter in hand. The letter is not a legal document, but it is a document nevertheless, and we as a committee were satisfied with this document, and Corporation Counsel is here if anybody has any questions with regards to that. Thank you.
Supervisor Rose, you have the floor.
Thank you. I had raised this question at the last meeting because the Burkes annually for many years had filed substantial multi-million-dollar claims with the county. Each year the county had rejected those claims, and I think this letter answers the question that I raised at the last meeting. However, I would suggest that this letter be made part of the record and part of the resolution that we are adopting here this evening. And I would so move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to make that paper part of the document that goes along with this. All those in favor of that?
Discussion on that? I'd like to have the corporation, our corporation counsel.
Sure we can. Corporation Counsel.
Clearly, it's the board's will is going to prevail. I don't think it's necessary. I understand the concern. As I indicated at the last meeting, as I believe Attorney Kopp indicated at the committee meeting, we've made it very clear that we cannot in any way, shape, or form ask the Burke Trust representatives to do anything other than we would ask from any other applicant. We have told them that they need to go through the proper process. They have now done so. As the only promise, if you will, that gets made is that having gone through the proper process, having made the changes that were requested, having gone to the town, having gone to the board, that then we will give it an up or down vote, the same we would any other applicant for this type of a matter. The letter was provided as a courtesy. We did not require it. We could not, in my opinion, require it before taking a vote. It was provided as a courtesy from the attorney to try and assuage any concerns about whether a cause of action might continue to exist. I continue to indicate, as I think I did at the last meeting, that is in some ways beside the point, and I could get into all of the legal niceties if people really want me to, but the fact is, I don't believe, and I may be mistaken, I don't know if there's anyone here from Planning and Development who can speak to it, I don't believe they have annually made this claim. I think they made this claim once. They have annually made overtures toward having this rezoning taken place. We've told them what they've needed to do. They've never done it. They did file a claim. It was disallowed. Nothing further has happened with it. And certainly it would be our contention that having provided them with a fair process following their complying with all of the requirements that we put before them, there would be no claim anyways, or there certainly would be no valid claim. That's my speculation. I don't think it's necessary to include it as part of the resolution. If someone wishes to have it be made part of the record, it certainly can be. Clearly, we are going to hang on to it as part of our file on this matter. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Corporation Counsel. Supervisor Noble, do you have anything further? Supervisor Rose?
No, I have nothing further.
Supervisor Gens?
I would just, like a one yes or no answer through the chair to the Corp Counsel. Is there a problem with us attaching this to the record? Yes or no? Yes or no? It's not in here, yes or no?
Lawyers don't do that, Supervisor. Lawyers give it depends answers. Is there a problem with attaching it? I think it is made clear that we are not voting contingent upon this. We are adding it to the record as part of the information that's being provided by the attorney. From
Thank
that-
you. I'll take that as a yes. Sometimes we pass feel-good resolutions. This is a feel-good attachment, and I feel better attaching it to the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gantz. Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As being part of this discussion numerous times and having some background on it, the original complaints, if you would call that, were filed, and it had to do with right-of-way that was required in order for them to subdivide their property. They have met that requirement to the town, and as a result, the importance of not putting some requirement on this, such as, okay, you guys tell us you won't ever bring a suit again. Well, that's foolishness, first of all. Number two is, we don't want to get in a situation, and this is how Corp Counsel explained it to the committee, that it's looking, we're treating them any differently than we treat any other property owner, because they are a property owner. If they've met the requirements that the permitting process and the comprehensive plan requires, and the zoning and all the other things that are required, we shouldn't be treating them any differently by putting in this additional document. So I don't support the addition of it, just because I've been exposed to a lot more discussion back and forth with regards to this issue. We would be fine because they have met the requirements, and that is the reason that they would file these complaints, is because we expected them, before we would act on their subdivision, to provide the required amount of land for the ingress and egress of additional road for emergency vehicles. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Skalitsky. Supervisor Decker.
Through the chair to Corporation Counsel, and I know the answer to this already because I asked it at our meeting, but I would like the entire board to know.
That takes a lot of the pressure off.
Okay. Is this letter legally binding?
This letter is not legally binding.
Thank you. So this letter, if we attach it, is not legally binding, so I just want the full county board to know that this letter is not legally binding, that including it in the record really means nothing, and I advise you to vote against including this, because this is singling out this property owner as opposed to other property owners that have asked for different zoning changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Decker. Supervisor Rose.
Well, I think you're very foolish if you don't include this as part of the record. My motion was to include this as part of the record, attach it to the resolution. It's a reminder to all of us in the future, and we are talking about the future, and they have filed claims and brought this issue to the attention on a number of occasions to the county board. If you look at paragraph 2 of the letter, it says the issues raised in the notice of claims and notice of injury would be resolved if the 3 pending applications are fully approved. The Burke Trust would have no further plans to commence litigation based upon the dispute outlined in the notice of claim and notice of injury, unquote. I'm not so confident that this wouldn't have some binding or estoppel effect in the event that there was some sort of commencement of litigation in the future. I have seen what Alderman Burke has done in the past. I am skeptical enough to recognize that this letter is an important attachment being part of the record. We're not treating them any differently than anybody else. We're recognizing what the facts are, and we're also recognizing that we don't want this letter lost, misplaced, that it is definitely part of the record. It's for our own protection. We're not representing Alderman Burke. He has counsel here. And I am, again, skeptical enough, and I think you ought to be skeptical enough, that we ought to protect our flanks just as they are protecting theirs. So what is the harm in placing this as part of the record, so that in the future, in the event that there is some sort of dispute or litigation here, we can remind them of what their counsel had to say. The issues raised in the notice of claim and notice of injury would be resolved if the 3 pending applications are fully approved. Amen.
I assume that's it when you with the amen. Vice Chair Bruning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having dealt with this issue for the past 8 years, I have to agree with Supervisor Rose. I have sat on that committee and I have chaired that committee longer than anyone else in this boardroom, and I understand this issue fully. There is no harm in attaching this to the resolution, and I think we would be wise to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bruning. Supervisor Noble.
The last two speakers and probably the speakers before them are both saying attached to the resolution, but we're about to vote on an ordinance. So are you saying it should be attached to Resolution 8, which is coming up later? And maybe Corporation Council could recommend which would be the better of the two to attach it to? I think they might be right, attach it to the resolution, but what's Corporation Council's thoughts on that?
Corporation Council.
Certainly would be my opinion that if we're going to attach it, it should be attached to the resolution, not the ordinance.
Right, which isn't even on, up for vote yet. But we can vote on it now and attach it to the resolution, I would assume. Corporation Council, am I correct?
It probably wouldn't be my preferred, but certainly we could dispense with the vote now.
Is that it, Supervisor Noble?
Yes.
Supervisor Decker? No? Okay, no more lights. We'll have a roll call, but let's reiterate what we're voting on right now. This is to attach the legal document from the lawyer to the letter from the lawyer, excuse me, that's why I want to clarify it right here. The letter from the lawyer to the ordinance that's before us right now.
Corporation Council suggests that we attach the letter. If we're going to attach it to either one, we attach it to the resolution number 8, which is coming up later in the agenda. Both speakers spoke. When they spoke, they said we should attach it to the resolution. Right now, we're voting on the ordinance. So,
Okay, so
I think Corporation Council said he would prefer that it came up as a suggestion when we get to the resolution. So I think they should take it off the table and wait till we get to resolution number 8.
thank you. Supervisor Rose, are you willing to do that?
No, and I'll tell you why. I think the ordinance is before us. I think Supervisor Noble, in all due respect, is quibbling here. This is one of those efforts to dance around it so that it's ultimately confused and defeated. What my proposal is to make it part of the record, attach it to the ordinances before us. Again, read paragraph 2 of Attorney Blackbourne's letter. He says the issues raised in the notice of claim and notice of injury, that means that is the prelude to the lawsuit, would be resolved if the 3 pending applications are fully approved. Why are you so reluctant to make it part of the record and attach it? Who are you representing? I'm representing the people of the district and their interest in this county board, not the Chicago aldermen.
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to get clarification so that the motion is to attach it to the ordinance. So I just want to make sure that we understood what we were voting on. Thank you.
That's correct. So now what's before us, we're going to do a roll call. What's before us is what Supervisor Rose just stated, to attach it to the ordinance, voting right now. Yes if you're in favor, no if you're against.
We have a problem with the system. So we need to do a verbal roll call vote. We're having a problem with the system at the moment. We've got IT on call. Grady? Aye. Rose? Aye. Gentz? Aye. Gable? Aye. Dodge? Aye. Kubicki.
Aye.
Paulman. Ron Johnson. O'Day. Arrington. Frederick, Ron Frederick. Blau. Colmeyer. Retzlaff. Esposito. Noble. Anita Johnson. Skalitsky. Poole. Brunig. Decker. Alverman. Six noes and, how many do we have total?
It passes. 6 noes.
16.
16,
16 to
6.
6. Now you need to vote on the ordinance itself.
Gotta go to number 5 now, you gotta read it.
Ordinance 4. No, we need to vote on the ordinance.
Now we will vote on the ordinance as amended. Okay. We'll have to do a voice vote all over again.
Same way. Grady. Rose. Gentz. Gable. Dodge. Kubicki.
Aye.
Paulman. Ron Johnson. O'Day. Arrington. Ron Frederick. Blau. Colmeyer. Retzlaff. Esposito. Noble. Anita Johnson. Skalitsky. Poole. Brunig. Decker. Elverman. 21 to 1.
Passes 21 to 1.
Ordinance 5, from Planning, Development, and Extension Education Committee regarding Anna M. Burke, trustee of the Anna M. Burke Revocable Trust owner, James P. Howe, Godfrey Lebsel, Blackburn, and Howarth, SC agent, requesting a rezoning from R1 Rural Residential District to R2 Suburban Single Family Residential District located in the town of Randall.
Supervisor Noble?
I move ordinance number 5.
It's been moved by Supervisor Noble, seconded by Supervisor Skalitsky. Supervisor Noble.
This property is basically the same property as ordinance number 4 at the intersection of 406th Avenue and 87th Street. The rezoning would allow for the property to be subdivided into 2 single-family lots. The town of Randall recommended approval of the request. It was referred back to committee. The committee reheard the item and has recommended approval unanimously.
Thank you. Seeing no lights at this time, voice vote. Yes if you're in favor, no if you're against. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously.
Resolution 1, from the Executive Committee, a resolution to urge the amending of the Wisconsin statutes to allow counties to address the issue of minimum wage individually. Kubicki, yes. Brunig, yes. Rose, yes. Elverman, yes. Paulman, yes. Esposito, excused. Noble, yes.
Supervisor Rose.
I would move the resolution.
It's been moved by Supervisor Rose, second by Supervisor Noble. Supervisor Rose.
All right, thank you. Comes from the Executive Committee. This is the type of resolution that in the future would go to the Legislative Committee for debate and approval or disapproval. What is the rationale behind this proposal? When Governor Doyle was governor, the law was changed. Before the change, counties could consider a minimum wage. The minimum wage in Wisconsin is very low. It's been the same for a long time. The resolution before you is an alternative resolution, either urging the state legislature to raise it for everybody, and I haven't specified any particular number in the resolution. So we don't have to focus on a dollar amount here, but merely to urge the legislature to act. But if they are unwilling to act, we're asking the legislature to revive the old law which allowed counties to address the issue of minimum wage. Why is there a need for the increase from this minimum wage? If you'll take a look at what the statistics are here in Kenosha County, 18,000 people in Kenosha County live below the federal poverty level. That's nearly 12% of the population, or about 55% of the poor. These poor are adults under the age of 65. So the need is substantial. It's also, we also have to recognize that when people can't afford very much, they can't afford health insurance. So they're going to have to go to the state and have that financed again. These are people who are going to have to turn to food stamps and other government programs. So it benefits them to lift them up, and it benefits all of us to do so as well. So I think the need is substantial, the need is there, and the issue should be addressed at the state level. But if the state legislature is not willing to do so, we're urging that at least the counties be allowed to address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Supervisor Poole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're in the midst of many new companies coming to relocate in Kenosha County, or looking to relocate, and this would have the impact of putting out a stop sign in Kenosha County. Indeed, just this resolution alone will make many of these companies take a second look at what they are contemplating. We need less government rules, not more. We need more entry-level jobs for kids, not less. If we expect our kids and grandkids to have a first job, then this cannot pass. Swiss voters recently voted down an increase in the minimum wage to $25. We need to do the same with this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Poole. Supervisor Noble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I went to the committee meeting, fully intended to voting against this, and didn't hear any arguments against it, and actually said when I voted that I was on the fence on this, and I voted yes. But having now thought about it, I don't think it's a good idea to give counties the ability. I mean, what swayed me was I didn't realize counties ever had it, so I ended up getting caught up in the thought process of that, as opposed to the thought process of what would we do if we ever had it. And I'm thinking the maker of the motion, even actually the last thing he said was this should be addressed on the state level. I totally agree with that. That's where it needs to be addressed. Back in the 60s, counties had the ability to set the age limit of consuming alcohol, and in Kenosha County, whether it was wise or not wise, they decided 18 was the year to be able to go to an 18-year-old beer bar, and so kids came from Racine County and all around to come and drink in Kenosha County. That, you know, that wasn't good for that. I don't think that was a good call to let counties have that. Now it's done on the state level. Not long ago, some cities and some villages had decided that they were tired of waiting around for the state, and they were going to do restaurants and bars for no smoking. I think that was a mistake too. I mean, you had business owners across the street from each other. You know, one had no smoking and another allowed smoking. So now that's also on the state level, and that's where it should be. Some things are just better done at the state level, and the minimum wage is one of that. If you get into putting them on the county level, you got lots of businesses nowadays that are franchises, and they're, you know, for the reasons I just enumerated, you'd have a difficult time for these franchise companies competing against potentially another of the same franchise, one stop up the road or potentially across the street on the county line. So I just don't think it's a good idea. And like I said, some things are just better off done on the state level. This should be addressed on the state level, and that's where I think I'm going to vote no tonight on this particular resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Noble. Supervisor Ritzloff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was at the committee and I expressed some of my concerns on this, and I'll repeat some of those to the board tonight. This resolution kind of is not stating what has actually happened. That state hasn't taken this up. In January, our state Senator Bob Wirch, Corey Mason from Racine, and a couple other assemblymen absolutely brought it up at the state level. On March 18th, this particular issue was argued and debated at the State Assembly for at least 5 hours. And even our Assemblyman, Mr. Barca, had 4 discussions. He was given unanimous consent to speak 4 times on it. So I think that's a little disingenuous to say that our state legislatures are not looking at this, because they are. The other issue I have is allowing the state, if they don't do it, to have a county do it. First of all, the current administration, the current majority would never let that happen, and even if that changed, they would never let a county go rogue and vote on something like this when other counties couldn't. We would compete against 71 other counties on this issue. That, to me, doesn't make sense. So putting that in mind, why do we tip our hand to our existing employers and new ones that are coming in through CABA and so forth, that we're going to dictate to them what we want you to pay your employees? I think that's not our position at this time, because it's something that we can't control. So I am also going to vote against this. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Ritzlaw. Supervisor Colmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep it short. A couple other supervisors had expressed my same concerns. I just think we're leading the state right now in economic development. I think the way to get higher wages, I'm for higher wages, but not bureaucratically mandating it through laws. It's just through supply and demand. If you think about, even we had a resolution last meeting to increase our own HVAC technicians, electricians. We had to do that not because another entity was telling us we had to do it. We had to do it to keep up with demand. So I mean, if you just look at the sheet of the jobs that we're creating and let this play out in the marketplace, we're going to have higher wages. And I think just we should stay the course and not do anything different than we're already doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Colmeyer. Supervisor Skolitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What this resolution basically says is Kenosha County and employers of Kenosha County, we really don't trust that you're smart enough, and the free market system, which has created the greatest country in the world, is capable of figuring out where wages should be. There are low-paying jobs and there are high-paying jobs. And for a government to come in and arbitrarily set some number based on a whim or some number that it arbitrarily selects flies right in the face of the free market system. Employers are looking to Kenosha County, and not more than a month or a month and a half, or it was 2 months ago, our own county executive sat here and gave us the state of the county. And he was very explicit of the fact that the economic future for Kenosha County is very bright. Well, if you put this wet blanket on it, it won't look so bright, because employers will look at this and say, whoa, our entry level is going to be dictated to us. So either A, and this hurts small businesses most. So small businesses either A, have to increase prices, which then potentially can turn away customers. They have to cut jobs because they can't afford it. They are in business to make money. They are not in business to create jobs. Jobs are a byproduct. And by arbitrarily setting some level on this, it undermines the free market system. Now, this resolution is a feel-good resolution, and it should make us all feel good, but it has no place on the county board floor as far as sending a signal, as other supervisors have very eloquently communicated, to potential and current employers that this board is anti-business, because we are not. A rising tide lifts all ships, and we shouldn't forget that. I don't support this resolution, and I hope that other supervisors will not support it either. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Skolitsky. Supervisor Rose.
Resolutions from county boards across the state do have an impact on the state legislatures. We heard that last week when, at the last meeting, when the State Director of Courts came here and urged us to adopt such a resolution that we will consider this evening. So don't think that these kinds of things have no impact. And I would also remind you that we do, in fact, set a minimum wage of $15 an hour with our high impact fund, which in resolution number 17 this evening, we are asking for a replenishment of that fund by further borrowing in it, because if a potential employer wants to come here, take advantage of that and obtain a forgivable loan, we tell them that they have to pay at least $15 an hour, and they have to at least create a certain number of jobs to do so. So we do set rules and regulations, and those rules and regulations were adopted by this board, and a good many of you were seated on this board when we adopted those resolutions. So we're doing that right now. I was interested in hearing one of the speakers this evening talk about minimum wages at the current level is good for our kids. Well, that might be, but the problem is that we're not talking about kids, we're talking about grown men and women who are supporting themselves and families who don't want to live on $7+ an hour because they can't afford to live that way. We're not talking about wages for kids, we're talking about wages for adults. And when you read in the Wall Street Journal that there are big business people throughout this country who are recognizing the same thing that this resolution is recognizing, that one of the problems in the consumer spending throughout this country, and one of the problems that we're not moving out of this recession as quickly as had been anticipated, is because of the low wages throughout this country. And so that's why I bring a resolution like this before the county board, in recognition of what's going on in this country, and a recognition that even the International Monetary Fund is recognizing we've got to raise these minimum wages throughout this country in order to get out of this recession that we're currently in. So let's not kid ourselves into thinking that somehow we're not doing right now for some people, but we're forgiving their loans if they pay $15 an hour and employ a certain number of people that we may require if they want to have money from the high impact fund. If you can do it there, you can do it for some ordinary person who's working for $7.25 or slightly more than that in this community.
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Supervisor Arrington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Supervisor Rose spoke to many of the points that I was going to point out to this board, and I'll be very brief. I think that we have a responsibility to all of the people that seek employment or are employed in Kenosha County. One thing that I don't like the vibration that at times we feel that we're not fair across the board. And for this board to ignore and to downplay the minimum wage situation that is taking place in Kenosha County is a huge disappointment, because you know that we should be paying people more than what we are offering. As for the jobs that are coming here, let those jobs come, but they need to come, and they need to understand that our people here are not for sale. That when you come here and you bring your jobs here, that our people want to be paid a fair, decent wage. Now, I don't know what that wage is. There's no number in this resolution that Terry has brought forth, but I will support this because we need to take a look at this. It's the responsible thing to do for each and every citizen in Kenosha County. We're not just talking about some people, because we get in the habit of talking about just some people. And I know that all of us are not all minimum wage working people. Some of us earn a lot more than a minimum wage. But for the people that are in the minimum wage category, we need to take a look at that so that they may be able to work for a decent wage. Now, I hear a lot of things about people complaining about food share and all these different things, and about the people that want to be the takers. But how do you expect to lower giving these so-called handouts, as I hear a lot of people talk about offline, if you're not going to raise the minimum wage for them to be able to earn the money they need to support their families? Yes, we have children that were going into entry-level jobs, but we have grown men. We have men with families, and they work hard, and they were laid off, and they have not been able to recover from this economical recession. And they deserve to go back into the job market and reestablish themselves financially so that they can take care of their families, so that they can pay their bills on time, so that they can take care of their responsibilities in their homes. And I believe that it's the responsible thing to do. Don't ignore this, and do not make an excuse about who's coming to Kenosha County to bring jobs here. They will come. But we need to be in position to explore this situation so that we put our people in the best situation to succeed financially also. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Arrington. Supervisor Goebel.
I agree the minimum wage was actually set years ago so businesses wouldn't take advantage of high school and college students, but we're not in that age anymore. The average worker at McDonald's is 27 years old. Walmart knows exactly how much to pay so the people do not qualify for their health insurance and has to go on Badger Care. We have temporary job agencies to provide workers to companies all over Kenosha. At $8 an hour is what they're getting paid. And I'm sure that temporary agency is making well over $10 an hour being paid by that company. The state of Wisconsin has refused. They did not even have a hearing on that minimum wage. They discussed the hearing, but it did not go to a hearing. That would be Assembly Bill 686. So if the state won't do anything, then fine. I think the county should step up and make itself heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Goebel. Supervisor Gens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very interesting debate. All different sides of the issue for all different reasons. For the record, I am in favor of increasing the minimum wage. But the problem I have is who regulates that and who sets it. I think that should be done at the state level. Just from the position of if I'm a business going anywhere, any county in Wisconsin, I mean, it could create a political issue, you know, of who would pay, who they could pay less. And I mean, to me, I just think it should be something done by the state. While I'm in favor of increasing the minimum wage, I'm not in favor of all different counties taking over because of what could happen with that. That's, I think, the thing we ought to think of, is what's going to happen. Not that I think our state legislature would allow all the counties to do this. I mean, I don't think that would happen. If they're not going to do it themselves, I don't think they're going to let us do it. And if we did it, I mean, I think if you say in Kenosha County we could help the people, get them some more money, that might be true. But also look what it'll do to all the different counties and how that interplay will be. And that's why I think it should be done at the state level. So that's why I'll be voting no for this particular resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gens. Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of this resolution. I want to speak directly to it. I've heard a number of speakers sort of move through tonight's agenda and not address really what is the issue at hand, which is the ability of counties to set the minimum wage. there's a very good reason, I think, as to why counties should have the ability to do that. Not that the state should or shouldn't, but why counties specifically should have a hand in that, should have an assist. And I mentioned this in committee, and I'll mention it here. Housing costs. Our housing costs in Kenosha, whether you know it or not, are tied into the Gary, Indiana, and Chicago housing corridor. Once you go to Racine, it becomes considerably cheaper for you to afford, whether it's a home, a condo, an apartment. I was in the city of Racine actually earlier this week. They had a apartment, 2-bedroom for $525 a month. In Kenosha, you're looking at $600, $650, maybe even $700, depending on where it's at. There's a substantial cost difference between Racine and Kenosha. Milwaukee is its own animal, Milwaukee County, in terms of housing prices. Dane County with Madison is its own animal in terms of housing prices. If you look at La Crosse, they're heavily influenced by the Twin Cities, which is just slightly outside the borders of the state in terms of their housing costs. Those areas are not representative of the rest of Wisconsin, which is considerably cheaper than the counties that I've just mentioned. So for that reason alone, because housing costs is such a large part of a family budget, there is good reason, just by that example, for counties to have the ability to set the minimum wage. Now, I guess the other question that sort of comes to mind is, were the state to allow us to do that? And we're not going to get into will they or won't they. I don't necessarily think that that's good leadership on the local level to assume that the state is always right, regardless as to who's in power. But were the state to allow us to do that, how would that, what would that look like? Well, it probably would look a little bit like they talked to the Council of Economic Advisors, they talked to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, they talked to the folks over in Workforce Development, and they would structure a minimum wage such that it had looked at the cost of living in all 72 counties of the state and maybe said that perhaps like with sales taxes right now, it allows counties to levy up to, I believe it's a 0.5% increase. Within that range, counties can have the ability to do that. They can choose to have one, not to have one, anywhere within that, they can do that. Smart state policy would allow for something similar with minimum wage, but would be structured as such to not give an incentive to counties to do that. In other words, it would be positioned where, for most counties, for the bulk of them, there would be no need for them to take up the issue. What the state would set as a floor would be sufficient. For others, they might see it wise to go beyond that. And I certainly think we have the expertise in-house, were something like that to be put into law, that we would be able to do that. And we could do that without damage to our employers, without damage to our citizens, without damage to a certain extent our political careers, which I hear there's a lot of emotion about in this room, and move about peacefully and carry on with other matters that would probably be far more significant. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Hallman. Seeing no more lights. Roll call requested. Okay. Is it working? Vote yes if you're in favor, no if you're against.
Yes, 12 no. 10 yes, 12 no. Failed.
It failed. 10 yes, 12 no. Motion failed.
Resolution 8 from the Planning Development Extension Education Committee regarding proposed comprehensive plan amendment. Anna M. Burke, trustee of the Anna M. Burke Revocable Trust owner, James B. Howe, Godfrey, Leibsill, Blackburn, and Howarth, SC agent, requesting an amendment to the adopted land use plan map for the Kenosha County 2035, map 65 of the comprehensive plan, from medium-density residential and primary environmental corridor to suburban density residential in the town of Randolph. Noble, yes. Decker, yes. Skalitsky, yes. Retzlaff, yes. Gable, yes.
Supervisor Noble?
I move resolution number 8.
It's been moved by Supervisor Noble, seconded by Supervisor Ritzloff. Supervisor Noble.
The state requires a resolution from the Planning, Development, and Extension Education Committee and an ordinance from the full county board to amend the comprehensive plan. This resolution would allow an amendment to the Kenosha County Comprehensive Plan for a change from medium-density residential and primary environmental corridor to suburban density residential on tax parcel 64-119-182-0490 in the town of Randall. The town of Randall recommended approval of the request, and this is related to the other two resolutions that we were referred back to the Planning and Development Committee, and the committee reheard it and recommend approval of this request.
Thank you. Seeing no lights, simple majority vote. All those in favor, aye. Aye. All those opposed? It passes unanimously.
New business, ordinance 9, from Planning Development Extension Education Committee regarding Donald P. Henn, owner, Jeff Badke, agent, requesting a rezoning from A1 Agricultural Preservation District and C1 Lowland Resource Conservancy District to A1 Agricultural Preservation District, R1 Rural Residential District, C1 Lowland Resource Conservancy District, and C2 Upland Resource Conservancy in the town of Paris. Noble, yes. Decker, yes. Galitsky, yes. Retzlaff, yes. Gable, yes.
Supervisor Noble?
I move ordinance number 9.
It's been moved by Supervisor Noble, seconded by Supervisor Gable. Supervisor Noble.
As you can see in your packet, this is a rather large piece of property, and it's at 842 136th Avenue. The rezoning would allow the woodlands on the property to be subdivided into 2 parcels. The town of Paris recommended approval of the request.
Thank you, Supervisor Noble. Simple majority vote. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. County Clerk.
Ordinance 10 from Planning Development Extension Education Committee regarding Century Oaks Farms LLC owner, Kenosha County Planning Development and Extension Education Committee sponsor, requesting a rezoning from A1 Agricultural Preservation District, C1 Lowland Resource Conservancy District, C2 Upland Resource Conservancy District, and FPO Floodplain Overlay District to A1 Agricultural Preservation District, C1 Lowland Resource Conservancy District, C2 Upland Resource Conservancy District, and FPO Floodplain Overlay District in the town of Wheatland. Noble, yes. Decker, yes. Galitsky, yes. Retzlaff, yes. Gable, yes.
Supervisor Noble.
I move ordinance number 10.
It's been moved by Supervisor Noble, seconded by Supervisor Decker. Supervisor Noble.
This piece of property, again in your package, you can see is a rather large piece of property located south of Dyer Lake. The property is commonly known as 4111 Dyer Lake Road. The rezoning request is considered a map amendment to reflect actual field conditions to accurately delineate the wetlands. The town of Wheatland recommended approval of the request.
Seeing no lights, a simple majority vote. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously.
Ordinance 11 from the Planning Development Extension Education Committee regarding proposed amendment to the Kenosha County General Zoning and Shoreland Floodplain Zoning Ordinance amending the floodplain overlay zoning district boundaries based revisions to the flood profiles made effective May 13, 2014 by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, through a letter of map revision, LOMR. Noble, yes. Decker, yes. Galitsky, yes. Retzlaff, yes. Gable, yes.
Supervisor Noble.
I move ordinance number 11.
It's been moved by Supervisor Noble, seconded by Supervisor Skalitsky. Supervisor Noble.
Again, in your package, you can see that this property is basically relates to the river on and around and running through the Carthage College campus. The item is regarded a proposed amendment to the Kenosha County General Zoning and Shoreland Floodplain Zoning Ordinance, which would amend the floodplain overlay zoning district boundaries based revisions to the flood profile as made effective May 13th of 2014 by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, through a letter of map revision, LOMAR. The Planning and Development Committee held a public hearing on June 11th regarding this item and recommends approval of the amendment. Basically, we need to keep our maps up in agreement with FEMA so that citizens of our county can apply for FEMA loans and FEMA insurance, I should say FEMA floodplain insurance. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Ritzloff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make this real quick because I am in for this, but one of the things that when we went through this, I think is important for us as county supervisors. There are some people, this is in Summers, my district, there are some people that are losing a little bit of their land because Carthage built 2 softball fields. They're now in a floodplain that was previously not. I'm okay with that from the standpoint that they were told about it. How strongly they were told about it was my concern, and I think I'm going to work on that with the planning people. That I think it's our responsibility to maybe check on our people to make sure they're aware of these things, just in case they get something from the county that they may not understand. And anyways, it just as a point, I think that's something that we should all remember when we're looking at these things, if it's something in our district. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Ritzloff. Supervisor Rose.
Mr. Chairman, to the chair of the committee, how, if any, is this going to impact Carthage?
Basically, it's already, FEMA has already done the remapping. We're basically adopting the mapping. Carthage, like Supervisor Retzloff said, they did some reconstruction on their ball fields and so on, and there's some fairly small pieces of property across the river for the most part that are now going to be part of the floodplain. Most of it was fairly low land and not very usable land anyways, but they were advised and they didn't object at the time. FEMA was doing the process of remapping the floodplain zones, so it doesn't really affect Carthage any, negatively, because they've got the ball fields now redone the way they need to get them so that they don't, I assume, so that they won't flood as often as they used to.
Does that answer your question, Supervisor Rose?
Yes, thank you.
Seeing no more lights, it's a simple majority vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Passes unanimously.
Resolution 14 from Supervisor Terry Rose to express opposition to the proposed lapse in state funding to the circuit court system.
Supervisor Rose.
I would move resolution number 14. And if I get a second, I would also then like to...
It's been seconded by Supervisor Goebel.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move to suspend the rules so that the resolution does not go to the committee, is not referred to committee, but considered by the board this evening, for the reason that there's some urgency in having this considered, and our opinion, if we support it, expressed to the state legislatures, to the governor, director of courts, and I would add the Supreme Court justices to the last paragraph of the resolution.
Okay, we've got a second already by Supervisor Gable. I already seconded that. What's that?
I seconded it. Well, it was Supervisor Gable, but he said it before Terry's.
Oh, I'm
said
sorry.
it was.
So, all right, so you said it, okay, I understand that. So they technically said it before you mentioned it, so Supervisor Gentz gets the second on that. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so we have a motion on the floor to suspend the rules. It requires 2/3 vote. There's no debate, it's non-debatable. We'll have a roll call on it. Yes, if you're in favor of suspending the rules. No, if you're against it.
Second to get it ready. Okay.
Okay, now you can vote, please. There it goes. The motion passes to suspend the rules 18-4. Now, on the motion itself, it's a simple majority vote since it passed, correct? We got, okay, debate on that is Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to do is just have a bit of a dialogue with the submitter of this resolution, and I'll start out with an apology because I did not make last meeting's presentation about the court system because I had a conflict with work. But in the resolution, you state there's $11.8 million reduction. Can you tell the board here what is the exact impact to Kenosha for that cut?
Hold on.
All right, do I have the floor, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you have the
All right.
floor.
At our last meeting, the Director of State Courts was here, and his estimate, and that's all it is an estimate because I don't think that has been decided, was at least $100,000. So we're talking about a six-figure. What has been requested is that $11.8 million be returned to the general fund. Now, keep in mind, they're not cutting the overall spending. This money has been taxed already. You're not going to get a tax reduction by the fact that this request has been made to return $11.8 million to the state general fund. This is an effort to pass either the cost on to the counties, and that's a choice we'd have to make, and it would be a six-figure here in Kenosha County at least, or we'd have to cut our budget itself. I think another fact that he brought to the attention of the board was that out of every dollar that is spent in tax money, less than a penny goes for the court system, 0.8%. So you're asking one branch of government to make a cut in an already very small budget. So the rest of state government consumes 99 plus cents, and the courts throughout the state consume less than a penny of that dollar. It's unfair. And who's going to be asked to pay for it if that cut is made? The counties will be asked to pay for that, or we'll have to make the choice to make those cuts. Where, how much, it has not been determined.
Okay, thank you for that. Can you articulate what, from your perspective, since you're the submitter of this resolution, what impacts you think these cuts would result in? And if you don't know specifically, more in general terms.
Well, if you take a look at paragraph number 2, I think it says some of the items here. Guardian ad litem assistance. The courts appoint guardian ad litems in numerous situations where minor children are involved, where incompetent people are involved. And those are required under state law. But those are areas where there might be cuts made. Where else are you going to cut costs? That's a good question. What about interpreters? Interpreters are necessary, but it's going to impact that interpreter assistance. Those are required. In other words, we're not going to get the funding we now receive from the state for such things as interpreter assistance or guardian ad litem assistance, and it's required. Who's going to pay it? How are you going to cut that at the local level? Well, you'll have to make other kinds of choices if the judges are still going to appoint the guardian ad litems, if the courts are still going to appoint the interpreters. You're going to have to cut that from some other budget, or you're going to have to lay off circuit court employees, or you're going to have to reach out and take a look at other areas, be it planning and development, or roads or trucks or somewhere. You're going to have to take some action to decide what's more important.
Okay. And anytime there are budget cuts, nobody likes it to happen to their specific area, and so I can understand with the director coming down and speaking and articulating his concerns. Some of them are very legitimate. Others, it's protecting your own turf. It's what you've gotten used to, but in these economic times, perhaps that isn't feasible. In your opinion, since you've got a vast amount of experience in the legal system, could offsetting some of these cuts be done in the forms of increased fees or fines or penalties, anything in those areas that could help offset that $100,000?
Well, you have to realize, for example, and I can give you a couple examples on that, guardian ad litem, they do bill out for those, but there's still money required because some of these people aren't paying the bill. They can't afford it. You can issue more fines, but some people can't afford those fines, and some of those people are incarcerated in prison or county jails, and you're not collecting it.
Okay. And obviously, things have changed since the original budget was passed. And did he give an indication of why, in this case, the circuit court system was being asked to surrender $11.8 million?
I don't have the answer to that.
Thank you.
And he did not answer that.
All right. And
I don't know.
The other question I had was, you chose to make a motion on suspending the rules. From your perspective, can you articulate why you feel that this needs to circumvent the committee review? It's a simple question.
It has nothing to do with
It has everything to do with this resolution.
It's been already voted on, Supervisor Skaliski. We're moving on to the next level here. We're past that. Either want to vote it up or you want to vote it down. You still have the floor.
Thank you very much.
Turn on Supervisor Gens's. Supervisor Gens, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just a little bit of housekeeping. I heard when Terry was going on before about wanting to add something to the last paragraph. I think that could be done through a friendly amendment with him in the second, but I don't know if he wants to modify what he's got before us or not. That's all I have.
Anybody else? Put Hallman's on now. Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we have our honorable clerk of courts in the room, and so I'm curious to hear what she has to say on this matter, seeing as she is the one that looks over these kinds of things on a daily basis and has been doing it for a while.
I also have our District Chief Judge Mary Kay Wagner here too. She can take any questions if you have. The $100,000 lapse in the court funding would result in significant changes to the way that the courts run. We're trying to implement electronic filing right now. We need staff to get that off the ground. We're not able to do that. Because of budget cuts in previous years, we've had to delay the process in doing that. We have taken baby steps in getting that, but again, my staff vacancy levels have been excessive, and we're just not able to move forward to that. So a bigger cut in the court's funding will almost put that to a halt for certain. Also, I'm not very creative in the words in the lapse in funding. This was a double dip to the courts, at my understanding, and perhaps Judge Wagner can better articulate that. The 11 million is the court system as in a whole is the only legislative agency to have to take that double hit. But again, I'm not that articulate in that, but I believe it was almost a double dip to the court system too, which is why Mr. Volker is coming around across to all the counties across the state to declare this message, to make it a point that this is just almost unfair to the court system as well.
Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you. I thought I still had the floor.
You still do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could, from the Chief Judge as well, since she's present, seek her wisdom on this matter as well.
If you attended the presentation, and I know some of you weren't able to because it was before your scheduled meeting, you got a copy of that pie chart, which indicated that there are certain areas that the state court system, the director of state courts, can cut. And they're generally, it all comes down to the grants that they give to the counties. So there aren't any other places to cut. So if the lapse is required, which we think it should not be, it's affecting many areas of the courts on the state level, but also county. There's just no other place for them to cut. If you remember the pie chart, it's the grants to the county governments that can be cut if they cut to keep the lapse going. And that affects your taxpayers, our taxpayers, us. So we think that the chief judges have taken a strong stand that the state court should not cut the grants to the counties, because we believe that the counties have been great partners with the courts. They have increasingly accepted more of a percentage of the cost of running the courts every year for the last probably 1, 2, 3, I've got 6 in front of me. 6 years. You've accepted more and more of the cost of running the courts. And we think that our partners shouldn't have to do that, and that the state should accept their part of the burden in this. Currently, I had a percentage in here, and I don't know where I set it at this time, but it's gone to 38% that the county, or that the state absorbs for the cost of the state court system, our court system, we're state, and 61% for the county burden. So that's your burden, and my burden as a taxpayer in this county, but we think that the state should contribute more and not be cutting you on your grants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hallman.
Yeah, I think it's important for all of us to remember that particularly at the local level and at the state level, the 3 biggest expenditure areas are typically healthcare, criminal justice, and education. And we've made great use of particularly treatment and diversion grant funds from the state, and I think some from the feds, to reduce our expenditures as it pertains to incarceration. And we didn't get necessarily as much money as we would have liked from the last budget cycle to continue to do that, so we moved a little bit of levy dollars over to keep that going because we felt that it was important. In the grand scheme of things, it was a way of trying to address a very serious issue with as minimal amount of funds as possible to do it. I think it's important for all supervisors to remember this. County government, and make no mistake about it, county government is an arm of the state. This is a partnership. And given the choice, when push comes to shove, it does not matter political party. Sometimes the reason is legitimate, sometimes it is illegitimate. They will shove you in a corner, and it is not always appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Hallman. Supervisor Rose.
I would ask that we add to the final paragraph here that a copy also be sent to the Wisconsin Supreme Court justices individually. And I would so move unless you feel that we can just add that without action.
needs a second on that in order.
Second.
It's seconded by Supervisor Goebel. All those in favor of the, or we're going to debate the amendment? You can do that now. Is there anybody wishing to debate the amendment?
Send it to the Supreme Court.
To send it to the Supreme Court? No? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously. Back to the item at hand. Supervisor Decker.
I apologize, I wasn't at the presentation either. I had a family issue at home that kept me there, so I missed the presentation. I don't know who would be able to answer this question, or if anyone is. What is the reasoning, or what was the reasoning for the governor and to propose this lapse in the 13-15 biennial budget? Do we know the reasoning behind that?
I see a lot of, no one seems to know. Yes.
Supervisors, and I want to stress, and I cannot stress strongly enough that I'm not certain of this, but it's my understanding, based on my involvement with the State Bar of Wisconsin, and so having had some other exposure to this issue, that there was first and there was reference to make to double dipping. I believe that first there was a cut to the monies that were going to be going to the court system generally as part of the budget process. Then on top of that, all state agencies were being required to return a percentage of their budget to the state general fund. And so hence, as the reference from the clerk of courts is double dipping, that's why there's a sense that the courts particularly were hit hard, because they were really being asked to take a double hit in terms of the potential funding. First a cut of what they had expected, and then the lapse that's being referred to, a request to return a portion that I believe all state agencies were asked to do.
So your understanding, at least, is that it was across the budget, that everyone had to lapse money back to the general fund?
The lapse.
So it wasn't specifically just the courts?
I believe.
That's your understanding?
Okay, I'm being told that that's incorrect, and as I said, I wanted to state I was not certain.
On. Everyone took this cut based on Act 10. The courts took it, we all took it, every agency took it, because it was reduced by the basis of having to contribute to your health insurance and your retirement. So it was absorbed in that. In the new budget, they passed that same reduction to the circuit courts again. And we went to the legislature, Chief Justice, the Supreme Court justices, and said, you're putting into this budget what you are not putting in anyone else's budget, and asking us to do it again. We can't do it again because it's already been done. The budget was reduced by that amount, and we lapsed it back the year before, or the budget before, okay? Then they said, no, it's not a mistake. The court's going to do that. So it didn't happen to everybody else. It happened to the courts.
Does that answer your question, Supervisor Decker?
Well, I still don't know what their reasoning, so no, but no one knows the answer to that question. Thank you.
Supervisor Ritzloff, you have the floor.
I understand this, and I agree with the concern. Again, this gets back to do our 3 assemblymen and state senator don't exist? Do they not hear about this? Don't they represent us at the state level when it comes to that budget? We don't like things, so do we just constantly do protests here about that? I mean, I guess we could take every one of their budget cuts, and I'm not trying to say this isn't important, but I mean, we could go on for days with various cuts that we don't like as a county. Again, do our 3 assemblymen know about this? Did they talk, and did our state senator get involved? Has anyone, the writer of this resolution, did he talk to those people? Why is this always on our court to do that when we have elected officials? If we don't like what they're doing, why don't we elect some others? So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Ritzloff. Supervisor Rose.
Well, I am astonished by the previous comment that it's naive. Of course, we have talked to the legislators, but this is a Republican legislature. They are Democratic, and this is a partisan issue. Now, why are we concerned, though? And should you be concerned? Because you will be asked, if these cuts are made, to make the choice of, are we going to fund it at the local level? In other words, our constituents going to pay for these cuts, or are we just going to pass along the cuts and have certain things that we think are essential not there? Or our case is going to move slower? Are laws not going to be enforced as quickly? Are trials not going to be heard as expeditiously because there aren't enough interpreters to go around? I mean, those are the kind of issues that are going to have to be made. Or are you going to take the money from somebody else's budget? We won't pave an extra mile this year. We'll cut that back, as we've cut back a number of times. So it's just not a matter of, well, we'll accept it and that's our fate. We're not willing to do that. This is a state court system. It isn't a county court system. We used to have a county and a state court system. Now we have a unified court system, yet we're paying most of the bill.
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Supervisor Gens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think that we as county board supervisors have the right to pick our battles and tell anybody who will listen what we think is unfair. And I think our Kenosha County court system has been cut and cut and cut, and I constantly hear that they have to make do with what they have, and they do a phenomenal job. And at this point, I'm not in favor, and the reason I support this is because, you know, you could just say, well, I'm going to cut it at the state level, and then, but ultimately, we're going to have to pick it up here. So it's not like they're cutting anything and they're helping the taxpayers. We're going to pay for it. We're either going to continue with the courts the way they are and have to charge our taxpayers for Kenosha County to do the court system here, or we're going to cut it and have to cut what they're doing. And I don't want to do that. I think they do a good job with what they have, and they're under the gun already. Excuse the pun, but I mean, I think that they do a phenomenal job. I don't think that this is, if you vote against this, you're saying, oh, we support cuts. I mean, ultimately, this money is going to have to be made up, or we're going to have to cut here. And I don't think that's fair, especially while they're telling us that we have to, as a state function, have our court system. It's almost an unfunded mandate. So I really think we should move on, support this. I don't know what action will be taken on the state level, but we should at least let them know that, you know, we really think they ought to find other cuts rather than cutting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gens. Supervisor Decker.
I'd just like to point out we have 4 assembly people representing Kenosha County, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and 3 state senators. Well, 1 just resigned, but we have 1 Republican and 2 Democrat state senators. So we do have representation on both sides of the aisle. So to say that we don't have representation on one side of the other aisle or the other, that is incorrect. And the reason why I asked that question before is, what's the reasoning behind it, is a lot of times there's reasoning behind it, and if we actually knew what it was, it might actually make sense. Supervisor Noble has talked earlier about our cell tower ordinance, which we had good ordinances in place, but the state came in the budget and basically repealed all of our ordinances, for lack of a better term, because other counties were being irresponsible with their cell tower ordinances. So, you know, it frustrates us, but I understand why they did it. And we don't know why the state cut this budget, this money, and I'd like to know why and to see what their reasoning is. Maybe it makes sense. If we had sent this to committee, we would have the time to do this, and I don't understand what the rush is, considering the fact the state legislature is out of session until after the election. So it's gonna, we're gonna vote on this, send it up to Madison, possibly, if it passes, and it's just gonna sit on their desks and nothing's gonna get done anyway, where we could have sent it to committee and discussed it, gotten more facts and things like that. But that's not happening, so I'm going to vote against it because I don't have all the facts, and I believe that might make a difference into our decision-making process, so thank you.
It's been called and seconded. All those in favor to call vote? Aye. All those opposed? No. 2 nays? No. 3 nays? Oh. Huh?
Point of order. He wasn't up on the queue. He can't just shout out, call the vote, unless that's the way you're going to run it. Normally, you wait until your turn comes up on the queue before you call the vote. He just shouted out, I'll call the vote.
Right there, John. Pass, no point. You weren't recognized, so we're gonna go. Oh, you're gonna recognize him now? What state your point?
You can call the vote at any time, but it has to be passed by the floor. Then it goes back to debate. Otherwise, debate goes on forever without ever calling the vote.
State your point, Supervisor Noble.
As I already stated, I mean, in the past, if you want to call the vote, you put your light on and wait your turn in the queue, and then you call the vote. You just don't shout out, want to call the vote. I mean, to me, we're going to get into the old Wild West here if we start running it that way.
Thank you.
If you want, just put your light on and call your vote when your turn comes up.
Supervisor Elverman.
I call the previous question.
Second.
It's been called and seconded. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed?
No.
I say it passes by majority.
To close debate requires 2/3, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
so let's do a roll call vote. Yes, if you're in favor of closing debate, no if you're not. Oh, I'm sorry. On the resolution.
It's on the resolution.
Yes, if you're in favor of it, no if you're against it.
Passes 17 to 5.
Passes 17 to 5.
Resolution 15 from Supervisor Michael Gable and Executive Committee to place an advisory referendum on the November 2014 ballot on raising the state minimum wage to $10.10 per hour. Kubicki, yes. Brunig, yes. Rose, yes. Hallman, yes. Esposito, excused. Noble, yes. Elverman, yes.
Supervisor Gable.
I move my referendum.
It's been moved by Supervisor Gable, seconded by Supervisor Hallman. Supervisor Gable.
On this referendum, a little information. The CNN Money American Dream poll found that 71% of the people favored a hike in the federal minimum wage. Like you say, 71% favored 10.10 an hour, 19% would have preferred something less, and 16% something higher. The minimum wage right now, in these dollars, will not buy what it did in 1956. Senator Hartman and Representative Miller have put before Congress a bill to raise the minimum wage. In the Assembly Bill 686, put forward by Corey Mason, did not get a hearing. And now the county board just spent an hour talking about the minimum wage. And my solution to this whole thing is let's let the voters decide. Let democracy rule. The referendum is fairly simple. Should the Wisconsin raise the minimum wage to 10.10 an hour? It's a yes or no. Let the people answer the question instead of us sitting here debating it. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gable. Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like just to have a dialogue with the submitter of this resolution. There are some facets that I certainly agree with, and then there's some others that I just have some questions about.
This is highly unusual. I know you've allowed it once this evening already, but these so-called dialogues with the maker of a resolution. We're debating. These dialogues don't rest well with me. For one thing, they're very time-consuming. If you want information, you can naturally contact the person. But for the group of us to have to listen to this dialogue, goes against anything I've ever experienced.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is one of our most cherished values, and that is that work, there's dignity to work. There's some statements in here that I just wanted to get some clarification on, and I think that they'd benefit a number of supervisors, with the exception of Supervisor Elverman, apparently. There's a statement in here that basically powerful corporations actively use their influence to hold down wages, benefits, creating economy-busting jobs rather than economy-boosting jobs. Could you add some clarity into what you mean by economy-busting versus economy-boosting?
Well, if you look at the service industry, which is where the minimum wage is usually paid, they're holding down everything. You have the Walmarts, and like I said before, you have temporary agencies that are putting people to work for $8 an hour, and we know that them temporary agencies are probably making between 12 and 14. The living wage right now in Wisconsin is about 12 and a quarter an hour. 10.10 is not a living wage, not by any means. The fact is, I put the 10.10 in there for a number of reasons, because I don't want the legislator in Madison to pass a 50-cent minimum wage bill and then pat themselves on the back for being heroes. You know, 10.10 is a doable. 600 economists signed a letter and supported a 10.10 minimum wage.
Okay, so there's no specific examples of economy busting or economy boosting. It just has to do with certain sectors, correct?
Well, industry is doing the same thing.
All right.
Okay.
I'm trying to get some clarity.
Unique here. This is a debate. You certainly have a right to express your opposition to whatever phrase is in there. If you don't like it, you can move to strike it. But I see a pattern here developing where one supervisor cross-examining another. I don't buy it. And I think it ought to be ruled out of order. It's not debate.
Yeah, I think I've let this gone on a little bit too much tonight, and I apologize for that. We have to get specific with our questions. And if we have questions, let's get them answered beforehand, and let's move on the process here, and let's get moving here. Sorry about that.
Okay, so since we're not going to get some specific clarification to statements and the way that it's written, I'll stick to essentially the same thing that I previously stated, and that is, again, we're getting back to the position of Kenosha County wanting to arbitrarily set a level of wages, irregardless of what the free market identifies as this has to do with this resolution.
Point of order.
And so as
That's not what this resolution is. It's a referendum. We're not debating 1010. We're not debating minimum wage. We're letting the voters.
Right. It's the content and the message within here. So we're voting on whether or not we want to add a referendum to the ballot in the fall.
Yes or no?
And that is the content which would influence whether or not I will vote or vote against it. Right now, I'm in a position of wanting to vote against it because there isn't enough, there's too vagueness. In fact, the numbers in the second page don't even add up. I have no idea where they came from. There's no explanation on it, and you can work them forward and backward.
That's your
and I have no
right
idea.
to vote
So
against it if you
this
wish.
point right now, and I still have the floor, I am not supporting this resolution to add a referendum to the fall ballot for the same reasons that I've articulated earlier. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Gens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to state that I had previously said that I would be in favor of an increase to the minimum wage. This does ask the state to do it rather than the counties. So I will be supporting that. But the other reason that I'm going to support this is that it doesn't cost us anything to do this referendum. Because I feel I know the outcome of what this referendum will be, so I wouldn't want to put it on the taxpayers to have a referendum. But in speaking with the clerk before the meeting, I found out that this isn't going to cost Kenosha County anything because we're paying to have the ballot done anyway. So putting another line on there is not going to increase the cost. That's what I was told. So had there been costs associated with it, I might have a problem with it. But I will be supporting this referendum. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor O'Day.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we all got these packets early enough for everybody to understand everything in these packets before they got here tonight. No matter how much verbiage we talk, 23 people, one person, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows how they're going to vote. Let's cut to the chase. I'm not going to call the question, but let's get on with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn it on, Ron. It's not working again.
It's on.
It's not working right. Supervisor Frederick, you have the floor. Supervisor Frederick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I had no illusions that Supervisor Rose's resolution would go up to Madison and they'd do anything but throw it in the garbage pail anyway, but I voted for it. This one's pretty simple, okay? You're asking the voters, the people who elected you, how they feel about raising the minimum wage for the lowest paid workers. It's not complicated. Are you afraid of what they'll say? It's not a partisan issue. It's a vote by the voters who elected each and every one of us in this room and asking them what they think about this legislation. It's not going to solve anything, but at least we'll know what Kenosha County thinks, and maybe other counties, and I understand there are other counties who are going to do the same thing, and find out what the voters in the community think. You know, Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter. What do you think about the minimum wage being raised to 10.10 or raised at all? That's not complicated. Let them vote. So you're going to vote no because you don't want to hear what your constituents have to say? Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Frederick. Supervisor Ritzlaw.
Can I ask the supervisor, did you write this?
Did I write it? No,
Well,
I
excuse
turned
me,
it
what
over.
does that matter? I mean, you can vote for it or against it, he's bringing it forward.
Here's what I'm saying. I'll tell you exactly why I'm saying this.
Okay.
Okay? I asked him a question. He can't answer it. Tell me he can't answer it.
You can answer it.
The referendum was given to me by a group in the state. A number of them have approached me about the minimum wage and getting it raised in Wisconsin. I turned it over to Corp Council to put it in Kenosha East, so it would be a the referendum would look like this.
Okay. I mean, I understand, okay, thank you for saying that you didn't write it. It came from some group. And I know that from what I understand, it's going to every county. And it appears to me, whether or not the issue, how you feel about the minimum wage, this looks like nothing more than a voting wedge issue to get people to vote. So that's all I see this to be. It's written kind of strange, but anyways, that's my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There's something wrong with getting people to vote?
That's enough. Supervisor Decker, you have the floor.
I find it kind of funny that Supervisor Frederick mentions letting people vote on a referendum question. I remember when I was first elected in 2010, I had a referendum question I wanted on the ballot. It was about the
We're talking about this right now, correct?
Yes, I'm speaking to that.
Okay.
My question was about the KRM. It went to the Legislative Committee. Supervisor Ron Frederick was on that, and he wouldn't second the motion to let it come to the floor for a vote, because he didn't want the people to vote on that issue. But now he's saying, let the people vote on this issue. And as Supervisor Retzloff said, there is an organized effort to put this on the ballot statewide, mostly in counties that they hope to turn out one side of the aisle to vote, so they vote against the current governor. So,
Point of order.
I've seen articles.
Point of order. This is
Can we get to the subject here and not about contrary about what do you think about whether or not you're voting against the governor or not? Let's vote for this right here, what's before us. Let's make it about this. Let's not make it about everything around it. This is what's on the floor. Let's vote about this. Because I've let this gone on too far tonight, and I apologize. I apologize to each and every one of you. So let's get specific. Let's talk about what's before us, and let's not make conjecture about whatever else is out there. So what is your question? If you have a question or a statement.
I am stating my statement before I was interrupted.
Well, I interrupted you because I chose to.
I have the floor, do I not?
You do have the floor, but I just want to reiterate my point to you.
And to state that this is conjecture is implying that I am incorrect. I have read newspaper articles about this, so I was just pointing that out to the other county board supervisors, that this may come as a resolution to have a referendum on the ballot, but there are ulterior motives to this, and so I am voting against this because of that.
That's enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to.
Supervisor Anita Johnson.
I want to make this brief.
Second.
Corporation counsel has informed me you do not have the right to call the question. You just
The motion to call the previous question requires being recognized by the chair under Robert's rules.
I just want to say this briefly. I'm all for bringing it to the people and letting the people vote, but however, you know, going back to what Supervisor Skolitsky pointed out, the statement, whereas powerful corporations actually actively use their influence to hold down wages, rubs me the wrong way. We're a county where we're trying to bring in corporations, and this is a blanket statement against corporations that just completely rubs me the wrong way. I don't like it in there, so if it stays in here, I will have to vote against it. Also, I want to point out on the next page, this is full of typos and errors and just bad grammar. You know, in the second paragraph, minimum wage would raises wages. It's like nobody proofread this, so I kind of have a problem with it. But mostly, I'll vote against it because of that sentence and how it's offensive to corporations in general.
Thank you. Supervisor Esposito.
Call the question.
The question has been called and has been seconded. Okay, we need 2/3 vote. If you're in favor of calling the question, vote yes. If If you're against it, vote no. Close debate.
We need to know for the record. Melvin Doolittle. Okay. We'll do a vote.
Okay.
Grady,
You have to do it verbally. We've got a glitch in the system again.
Rose. Gentz. Gable. Dodge. Kubicki.
Aye.
Holman. Ron Johnson. O'Day. Arrington. Ron Frederick. Blau. Colmeyer. Retzloff. Esposito. Noble. Anita Johnson. Skalitsky. Poole. Brunig. Decker. Alberman. Left. We have 15 yes.
Board isn't working. Was it?
We have 15 yes. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, no.
Hmm?
What are they doing now?
Just made it. It passes 15 to 6.
Debate's closed.
Debate is closed. Okay, now before you is the vote, and a simple majority would suffice in this, but someone should ask for a roll call. This one. Yeah, huh? Yeah. Roll call as we requested. If you're in favor, vote aye. If you're against it, vote no. What? This resolution itself. The resolution itself. I dropped it to 1, last to 15.
What's the number? 14 to 7. 14 yes, 7 no.
Motion passes 14 to 7.
Resolution 16 from Finance Administration Committee regarding 2015 Kenosha County Budget Advisory Levy Objective. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Colmeyer, no. Brunig, excused. Gens, no. Dodge, yes.
Supervisor Rose.
I would move the resolution.
It's been moved by Supervisor Rose, seconded by Supervisor Ron Frederick. Supervisor Rose.
This is an annual resolution that started approximately 10 years ago, authored originally by then Supervisor Joe Clark, seconded by myself. The resolution is a budget restraint resolution. It's advisory. It's a sense of the county board to the county executive to consider that in any given year, and in this year, the forthcoming 2015 budget, that any tax levy increase be in an amount not to exceed 2.5%. The fiscal note, I think, is a good explanation that there will be cuts made in order to achieve this. And the debt service is going to increase by $955,610 in increase from 2014. So this is definitely going to be an added restraint to meet that budget objective and keep the budget as it has been for the last 10 years, very modest increases.
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Supervisor Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Supervisor Rose illustrated, this has been an annual event. It works to our benefit as a county to inform the administration what our expectations are coming budget time. It has worked in the past, and it gives everyone, certainly, how's that? Gives everyone in the room the opportunity to know what we're expecting beforehand. So, well thought out, well advised. I'd encourage you all to vote on this with little rancor or debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Grady. Supervisor Kohlmeyer.
I'd like to make a motion to refer this back to committee.
The motion is made to put it back to committee by Supervisor Kohlmeyer, seconded by Supervisor Skalitsky. On the motion, I'd like a roll call on this.
I'd like to speak on it, Mr.
Sorry.
Chairman.
Debate, sorry, you're right. Debate, sorry.
Can I explain?
Yeah, go ahead.
The main reason I voted no, I just felt like we didn't have enough, the committee itself didn't have enough time to do due diligence on this. It was listed as a discussion as possible, and we presented the numbers at the meeting, and we had a discussion about the debt, which we're going to vote on at the next Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to take a holistic approach. I did get a chance to ask a couple questions to the finance staff, but I kind of felt like this is being rushed. So I'd just like to take a time to digest some of these numbers, ask some more questions. So that's the reasoning. I don't think there's an urgency to pass this tonight.
Thank you. Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Supervisor Kohlmeyer for recommending it back to committee, because I certainly have some questions. I have not had a chance to digest it. There's some numbers here that I'm not going to sit and ask questions about. I'll hopefully be able to align my schedule with the committee meeting that'll discuss this in detail. And I appreciate your motion on that, Supervisor Kohlmeyer. Thank you.
Supervisor Ron Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, a few years ago, if we remember, I think it was about 3 years ago, I objected to the fact that, you know, the county executive asked us to give us a number, 2% or 1% or whatever, because I didn't think that process should work that way. I felt that he should present his budget, and then we should do our job, and if we didn't like his budget, we could amend it any way we want. But I see nothing wrong with this 2.5%, just for the sake of, it doesn't lock us into anything, okay? It says, okay, I'll wait for the referral to lose. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Frederick. Supervisor Gantz.
I have no problem with this going back, as I was one of the no voters on the committee, because I thought that a wait until July would allow us to get a little bit more information on the numbers that were there. So that explains my vote on the committee level, whether or not I'm in favor of 2.5, 2, or whatever. I wanted to wait until July, so that this referral back to the committee will accomplish that. So I'll be supporting it. I'd just like to say a little bit on this. I think it's time to look at having a battle before a battle. So, you know, having this resolution out there, I don't know that this is a good thing for us. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gantz. Seeing no more lights.
Mr. Chairman, I've had my light on all along.
Well, I've had you on. Sorry.
I'd like to speak to this, and there's no reason to submit this back to the committee. We fully debated this. There's nothing else to debate in committee. Everybody was notified they could have been there, or at least they had a right to be there. You chose not to be there, but the committee has debated the issue. There were some who spoke at that committee who did not want to see 2.5%. They, I think, were in favor of something higher, but no one spoke for anything lower. The fiscal note is complete. The 2015 levy forecast attached to this is complete. This resolution, as long as it has been passed by this board, has been a budget restraint. It's been a directive to the executive to hold the line. It's been a conservative approach. And if you look at the budgets before this levy resolution had been considered annually, our taxes increased substantially more than at any time that we passed this budget resolution, this levy objective. We saw budget increases of 5% and 8% and 7%. We passed the budget resolution, levy objective, and every executive has either met or done better than the objective. So you're accomplishing nothing by sending this back to committee. There's nothing more to be said on this resolution. This is our directive, our sense of the county board, and I think the executives have appreciated knowing what that levy objective advisory is. So I would urge you not to send this back to committee. There's no reason to do so.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak on the referral? Supervisor Grady.
My sentiments are much the same as spoken just a few moments ago. The salient point here is this is an advisory motion. This is something that tells our county executive, tell your department heads, come in with a certain type of budgetary constraint. This is what we're looking for. So in that sense, this is not set in stone. If it goes back to committee, you say 2%, you say 2.5%, 2.75%. It really is not the issue of the set in stone as it is a starting point. When we have our budget hearings, we can still debate, we can add, we can cut, we can delete as we always do. But this has been approved by the committee. I see it went through with one no vote. Everyone else said yes. So putting it back to committee at this time, you can do it, but it won't really achieve much. So my theory would be go ahead and vote as it is. I would vote against the referral. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Grady. Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question to the Director of Finance, if I could.
Director of Finance.
Through the chair to the Director of Finance, are there any, shall we say, unknowns built into this proposal that might be in a state of flux? I know sometimes there are details that are still outstanding that we don't know until the last minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's a forecast. It's our best, the best stab at this thing at this point in time, but you know, I would expect some of those numbers to change that are in the forecast.
And anything within the next month and a half that would be that immediate, or are they more long-term than that?
We'll probably see the bigger changes sometime after that. You know, we'll learn about the property values in August. We'll learn about the health insurance in September. You know, some of the bigger things that'll have a, you know, they'll move the budget more. We'll learn probably after July.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my question.
All right, so seeing no more lights, we're voting on a roll call vote to refer it back to committee. If you're in favor of referring it back to the committee, vote yes. If you're not in favor of it, vote no.
failed. 9 to 12.
Okay, motion failed. Now we're going back to the motion itself as presented.
Give her time to set it up. Give her time to set it up.
We're set up. Set? No, we got to vote on the regular one. You set? Okay, now we're voting as presented without the advisory limit as it is right now. Vote yes if you're in favor of it, 2.5, no if you're against. I tried to get it on.
Thank you, Mr. I had one question to the Director of Finance, if I could.
Doesn't matter? We'll clear it.
It's voting now.
I apologize. I had my light on, but I wasn't recognized, so these things happen. To the Director of Finance, what is the maximum amount allowed by the state levy cap allowed by law that we potentially could go, just for curiosity's sake?
It's a double-digit number. I couldn't cite the exact number right now, but it's it's over 10%.
That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Know what you did there. God damn it. Supervisor Skolitsky.
Is that, I wish our Director of Finance would have stayed up there.
That's what you did.
Sorry.
There are just two numbers that are a bit striking. One is the increase in health insurance, and perhaps you could help me understand why is that increasing $1 million? And the other one is the debt service increase, and I'm just trying to get a little bit better handle why that's going up by almost $1 million.
Yeah, on the health insurance, it's a $20 million number. We work with the actuary on the trend, and the trend is about 5%, I think you've all been reading the press that says southeastern Wisconsin has higher costs for doctors, and the cost trend of health insurance has gone up a bit. But we use that. That's a good number as a starting number, but we fine-tune that through the actuaries, and that works very well for us. We're self-insured, so being self-insured saves us money. But so the actuaries, we go as late in the year as possible. I think we cut the thing off at the end of June or July. I'm trying to remember the cutoff date. So we get as much experience under our belt as possible, and then the actuaries do their stuff in August, and we get the number, a pretty good number in September. That's worked pretty good for us. And it is correct that the trend has been the forecast. We use the reasonable economic estimate, but when we go to the actuary looking at what's actually happening with us, we've been able to pare that back and help cut that roughly $3 million bogey that we have to, that nut that we have to balance. So that's that. The debt service, I'd have to go back and analyze the schedule. I know we took on some pretty big projects. I think, we did some significant improvements in the Civic Center area, and a lot of that debt is coming on schedule now, and if I were to go actually look at the schedule, that's what I would see. I think that's what's happening with the debt service. The $14 million number moving up to about a $15 million number. It isn't because interest costs are rising. Interest costs are moderated. It's because of the level of projects we've been undertaking.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Rose.
Move the previous question.
It's been moved. Do we have a second? Seconded by Supervisor Esposito. We'll do a roll call to close debate. Yes if you're in favor of closing debate, no if you're not.
17 yes, 4 no.
Motion passes. Now we're going to be voting on the actual motion itself, the advisory limit objective. So if you're, I'm going to ask for a roll call. If you're in favor of it, yes. If you're against it, no. IT's gonna have a busy day tomorrow.
I may need to change the batteries.
Hmm? Is it?
Arrington pushed on his too. Okay. We may need to replace some of the batteries in those. We'll check them with AT. Okay. We'll replace the batteries in all of them. Is it locked up?
Voice vote again? A lot of those for that.
Well, just give me one and I'll mark it separate.
Terrible.
All right, it looks like we're locked out until those are confirmed, so we'll do a voice. Grady? Rose? Yes. Gentz? Yes. Gable? Yes. Dodge? Yes. Kubicki?
Yes.
Alman? Yes. Ron Johnson? O'Day? Yes. Arrington? Yes. Ron Frederick? Yes. Blau? Yes. Colmeyer? No. Retzlaff? No. Esposito? Yes. Noble? Yes. Anita Johnson? No. Skalitsky? No. Poole? Brunig? Yes. Decker? No. Alberman? Excuse, whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Motion passes 15-6.
Actually, 5. 15, 5.
5? 15-5. That is 6 the first time.
Up here.
You're right the first time. Yeah, 6, yeah.
So we can't move from that because it's locked up? We don't have any batteries right now either, do we? Where are we at?
17.
Resolution 17 from Finance Administration Committee, a resolution to modify 2014 budget for the Kenosha County High Impact Development Fund. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Colmeyer, yes. Brunick, excused. Gentz, yes. Dodge, yes.
Supervisor Rose.
I would move the resolution.
It's been moved by Supervisor Rose, second by Supervisor O'Day. Supervisor Rose.
This is a modification of the 2014 budget previously adopted by the county board. The resolution calls for additional funding for the High Impact Fund, which is administered by CABA and funded by Kenosha County. The resolution indicates that it is necessary to appropriate an additional $1 million for current pledged high-impact projects and to have an additional funds available for prospective projects, and that therefore it is necessary to borrow an additional $1,250,000 in 2014 to complete pending projects and to leave a balance of approximately $525,000 for future prospective projects, and therefore the committee asks for your support.
Okay, this is a budget, oh, we got one here. Supervisor Decker.
So to the chair of the committee, I just want to clarify. So we pledged more, or it was pledged, more money was pledged than that was in the fund?
That is correct. We have more successful projects than were anticipated, and therefore more money was needed than originally thought. In other words, we're doing better than expected and better than we planned. It's an ideal situation.
Well, the ideal situation would have
Pardon me?
been to budget properly.
Pardon me?
The ideal situation would have been to budget properly, especially when our last resolution says that our debt service increase is almost $1 million over the previous year. So now we're asking to throw another $1,250,000 mid-budget.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right, may I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Rose.
You know, this has been one of the most successful things Kenosha County has done since the closing of Chrysler and the closing of many of the old industrial plants in Kenosha. Perhaps you've forgotten not only that Chrysler has closed, but many other companies. We don't have a Simmons company here anymore. We don't have an Ironson Foundry. We don't have a Frost company. We don't have an American Brass. We don't have an Anaconda Copper. We don't have many of those small machine shops that used to be here, which were dependent upon the larger companies. Snap-on Tools is not a manufacturer in Kenosha as it once was. It has its corporate headquarters here. The list is long. And through our efforts with CABA, this high-impact fund, we brought thousands of jobs here. This resolution, I would remind you, cites that $2,475,000 of high-impact funds have been utilized or are pending to secure 5 high-impact projects, which would have created 1,114 new jobs, a total new annual payroll exceeding $55.5 million, and a private investment total of $123 million. How can you argue with that for this small investment? And one is criticized for this?
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Supervisor Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you take a look at Kenosha County as being regarded as a hot spot, you can read it in various papers, or read it in Chicago paper, Milwaukee paper. People are envious of us here in Kenosha, of our ability to attract not just entry-level positions for our workers, but up the food chain. We're talking about not minimum 10 per wage, we're talking 15, 20, 22.50 per hour in some of these cases. So you have this money, which we have to bond for, admittedly. It's a debt forgiveness program, but it's a leverage type action. It's a springboard. It's a springboard that keeps us, Kenosha County, a desirable place to live, to recreate, to work, and to basically be a certain degree of economic prosperity that we would not have without these programs. So much as was said earlier, you know, you can look at the glass as being half empty and saying, oh, we have to bond for another $1.25 million. That is a good thing, because the benefits you derive from that are not just from the manufacturer, but it's throughout the whole community for job security and job diversification. So without further ado, I would encourage everyone in this room to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Grady. Supervisor Ritzlaff.
Yeah, I just have a couple questions. I guess Supervisor Rose, if CABA, they make the monetary commitments, so they make it before we approve it, is that right? So that's why we're looking at this, because they have made a commitment to someone, or they're going to, is that right? If I can ask that question, Mr. Chairman?
Shall I answer? All right. This is a technical question, and I would ask if Mr. Battle, who's the president, could answer the nuts and bolts of that.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. My name's Todd Battle. I'm the president of CABA, and so we manage the High Impact Fund program. In the initial situation, when the program was originally established, the county made $1 million investment in the program. So essentially that was cash on hand, and there was a fair amount of flexibility and autonomy granted to CABA to manage the program within a set of guidelines and parameters that this board established through a contract. That original $1 million was then supplemented with a $500,000 commitment the following budget year. Those funds have been pledged and or allocated to projects. Then in your 2014 budget, in your CIP, there was another $1.5 million approved to come into this program, but on a schedule that would bring it into the program over the next 5 budget years through your CIP process. So we had some conversations with members of the board, administration, and others, and said, you have $1.5 million budgeted to come to us. Right now, we have incredible opportunities in front of us with companies and projects in demand for these funds. It would be, you know, if that money's budgeted to come to us, is there any way that you might consider accelerating it and bringing additional funds to us? And there seemed to be good consensus for that. We frankly, in the situation we were in, did not have the ability to wait for this budget amendment to be done, and we really also didn't have the ability to disclose some of the projects we were working on at the time. We were kind of held to a confidentiality agreement. We felt in order to get those deals done, it was necessary on a handshake and a pledge to commit the funds to these companies, and we did so knowing full well that was some risk. We are not going to, back out on the commitment that we've made to either InSinkErator or Niagara Bottling. So if for whatever reason the county chose not to fund the program or not accelerate the funding, we've already made a commitment to those companies. If the county doesn't support the resolution to put additional funds in, we would have to figure out a way to fund those projects. We're not going to back out on the company. I guess we proceeded down the path of making commitments to the company with the idea that there was money in the budget from the county to come to this program, and what we'd really be putting in front of the county board at some future date, once we were in a position to do that, would be kind of a budget resolution that would accelerate the funding coming into the program sooner rather than later to take advantage of the economic development opportunities we have right now. So that it's not kind of a best practice, nor is it standard operating procedure that we would pledge money that we don't have. We just felt in the situation we were in, one of the advantages of this high impact program has been typically we have the money and a fair amount of flexibility to be pretty aggressive in deploying it, and that's been a strength for us in terms of getting deals done. So it wouldn't be a best practice or a standard operating procedure. I think the circumstances dictated it, and we made those commitments to the companies in order to get projects across the finish line.
Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. You can understand there's a couple sides to that. I just want to bring that up, that, we're looking at, I think it'll be $1 million. It'll be $1.2 million because we added, you added 250 to the budget. So I just, it's something to keep in mind that this isn't cheap, but we have to make those decisions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Ritzloff. Supervisor Gintz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been one of Kenosha County's shining moments, is our high impact fund and what we've done to attract businesses to our area. This would be the equivalent of riding a winning streak and then benching the people who got us there. I really feel at this point we need to fund this. When I'm out knocking on doors, one of the first two things I hear are jobs. And we have done a phenomenal job at that over the last few years through this partnership. And I strongly urge everybody to support Kenosha County continuing on the road it's on to bring businesses to our area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Gantz. Supervisor Skalitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The success of this program is unquestioned. They've done an outstanding job. What I'm wrestling with is I look at just my own property taxes, and they have gone up every single year. So I look at this as an investment, you're right. But when is the investment going to pay back for the taxpayer in the form of a reduction? And we just talked about the previous resolution, levy recommendation. When are we going to see it coming back? And that's what I wrestle with, because, you know, I just look at myself, let alone my neighbors, which are my constituents, and I know it's no different for them. Wages aren't necessarily increasing, but we're asking for them to each year pay in more. This is successful, and I like the way it operates. I like the fact that we're attracting this caliber of companies. I concur with many of the other supervisors who've stated the obvious of we are the envy of many other areas of how are you doing it. And that is all positive. It's just I'm trying to wrestle with my mind. When is the table going to flip and the taxpayer start seeing some relief? Because I haven't seen any, nor have my constituents, unless it's been a devaluation of the property. So that's where I'm struggling with adding another $1 million on top of what we had just talked about with the levy recommendation. And I'm not against this program. I think it's good. And we've heard from the previous chairman how strongly he felt that this is a very positive entity. But that's where I'm on the fence of both supporting, but then wondering, when is the return going to come back for the taxpayer? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing no more lights, this is a budget modification. It requires 2/3 vote. Vote yes if you're in favor of it, no if you're against it. You gotta believe me, it's working. It passes.
Passes.
You wanted to change your vote to yes? Okay. Supervisor Poole wishes to change his vote to yes. It passes unanimously. Thank you.
Resolution 18 from Human Service Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Dr. Margaret Regner Hodge to the Kenosha County Board of Health. Hallman, yes. Gable, yes. Anita Johnson, excused. Decker, excused. Arrington, yes. Blau, yes. Ritzloff, yes.
Supervisor Hallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move 18 and 19 if there's no objection.
Been moved and seconded for putting those two together, 18 and 19. All those in favor of that? Aye. Opposed? It's granted. Go ahead, Supervisor Hallman. We have to read into the record 19 first, and then we can.
Resolution 19 from Human Service Committee, a resolution to approve the reappointment of Edna Highland to the Brookside Board of Trustees. Hallman, yes. Gable, yes. Anita Johnson, excused. Decker, excused. Arrington, yes. Blau, yes. Ritzloff, yes.
Supervisor Hallman,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We went over 18 as part of my committee report at the last county board meeting, I believe, so I won't go into that.
Thank you.
Number 19 is, of course, our former county clerk, Ms. Edna Highland, who's provided great community service to Kenosha County over a number of years. Certainly you have the information of both of these ladies in your packets, and so I will cease to speak any further. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of these two appointments, say aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously.
Resolution 20 from Judiciary and Law and Finance Administration Committee regarding FY 2014 Law Enforcement Justice Assistant Grant. Esposito, yes. Anita Johnson, yes. Blake Frederick, yes. Arrington, excused. Ron Johnson, yes. Blau, yes. Poole, yes. Finance Administration, Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Brunig, excused. Colmeyer, yes. Dodge, yes. Gens, yes.
Supervisor Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Resolution 20.
It's been moved by Supervisor Esposito, seconded by Supervisor Ron Johnson. Supervisor Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a JAG Law Enforcement Justice Assistant Grant. That's an annual grant, $13,000. $13,386 is awarded to the Sheriff's Department. They are going to be used for some LED traffic wands, conduction energy devices, AKA a taser, so on and so forth. It was approved by both committees. I urge your approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Esposito. Seeing no lights, this is a budget modification. Vote yes if you're in favor, no if you're against.
Pass unanimously.
It's passed unanimously.
21, from Public Works Facility Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Attorney David P. Wilk to the Kenosha County Traffic Safety Commission. Elverman excused. Grady, yes. Boyd Frederick excused. Skalitsky, yes. John Poole, yes.
Supervisor Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it pleases the chair and the rest of the group here, move 21 and 22 at the same time. These routine appointments from the county executive to the Kenosha County Traffic Safety Commission.
Is there a second to that? Second. All those in favor of the motion? Aye. All those opposed? Okay, go ahead, Supervisor Grady. Second.
22, from Public Works Facility Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Captain Edo Macari to the Kenosha County Traffic Safety Commission. Elverman excused. Grady, yes. Boyd Frederick excused. Skalitsky, yes. Poole, yes.
Supervisor Grady.
Yes, again, another routine appointment, looking to fill out the status that we need for the Kenosha County Traffic Safety Commission, and Captain Macari succeeds himself, so I urge your approval.
Seeing no lights, all those in favor of these appointments, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
23, from Public Works Facility and Finance Administration Committees regarding County Park Mountain Bike Trail. Public Works, Elverman excused. Grady, yes. Boyd Frederick excused. Skalitsky, yes. Poole, yes. Finance Administration, Rose, yes. Ron Frederick, yes. O'Day, yes. Colmeyer, yes. Gens, yes. Brunig excused. Dodge, yes.
Supervisor Grady.
Move resolution 23.
It's been moved by Supervisor Grady, seconded by Supervisor Poole. Supervisor Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Salient point can be found in the second whereas. Mountain bike enthusiasts living in Kenosha County surrounding areas collect funds that can be used by the county for construction and maintenance on these trails. So we're talking about user financing. It's a very good thing. We'd be the administrator of those funds. If you turn to your second page, the increases, it's projected possibly up to $5,000. We don't know if we'll get that much, but it's a good thing for the county, and I urge your approval.
Thank you. Seeing no lights, this is a budget modification. Yes if you're in favor of it, no if you're against. Passes unanimously. County Clerk.
Communications from Andy M. Bueller regarding future items scheduled before the Planning Development and Extension Education Committee.
Receive and file that, please.
Claims.
What's that? State your point.
Tonight, the speakers here, I don't think have been working. It's been very hard to hear everyone speaking, even the people right next to me. I'm wondering if it's because the lights are turned off or something. I don't know.
Lights in the speakers?
Well, you know, maybe they're on the same circuit. I don't know, but it's been very hard to hear all night long.
We're going to have IT look over the whole system tomorrow.
Okay,
It's gonna
thank
be a
you.
revamping in here. Thank you for that.
Claims, Bruce L. Miller, personal injury.
Refer to Corporation Council.
Colleen A. Glaves, personal injury, vehicle damage.
Refer to Corporation Council.
Approval of the minutes from the June 3rd, 2014 Committee of the Whole and regular meetings by Supervisor Noble.
Supervisor Noble.
Third, I see a typo. It's listed as Kendall Manufacturing. I think it's actually Kenall Manufacturing, just a typo, but for what that's worth, thank you.
Kennel is that one. Kennel Manufacturing.
If you look at the first paragraph, June 3rd on the meeting minutes, the business is listed as Kendall Manufacturing. I believe our new counterpart in Kenosha County is Kenall, K-E-N-A-L-L. So I just encourage the correction of that typo.
Thank you. Supervisor Noble with the correction.
Motion with the typo correction, sure.
And it was seconded by Supervisor Hallman. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes. Motion to adjourn. It's been moved by Supervisor Hallman, seconded by Supervisor Decker. All those in favor? Thank you.
Man.
Get worse before it gets better.
If